Hi, it's been a while. I'm so glad you're here. Have you got 10 minutes? Okay, great, because I think this is going to take about 10 minutes and it's important. Blackout Tuesday, that was June 2nd, 2020, 3 weeks ago now. And like many other people, I posted a black square on my Instagram and Facebook, and my caption was listening and learning. I really meant that, but where to start was a little bit overwhelming. So what I'd like to share with you today is how I kind of formulated my own learning journey, in case that's helpful to you. And spoiler alert, right up front, my strategy was basically three things. I looked for resources that were personally and locally and professionally meaningful to me. So there you have it. If you don't have the 10 minutes, there's the strategy right up front. All right? Okay, so Blackout Tuesday. It was hard for me to figure out where my learning should start. I said listening and learning, I really meant it. And I'm a reader, so I was looking at the reading lists, and there were a lot of them. In fact, there were so many. That was part of the overwhelm, was that there were so many reading suggestions. And then there were the titles, right? The titles on some of these book lists were intimidating to me. They had words I wasn't familiar with, words like anti-racist and white fragility. And one of the titles is Me and White Supremacy. Whew. I thought, surely these books weren't written for me? So anyway, I decided I was going to start in a place that was personally meaningful for me. I was going to start with the man who signed my undergraduate degree, Lincoln M. Alexander, Chancellor. Now, those who knew him called him Link. I didn't know him. I knew that he was distinguished and well-respected. I knew that my mom was really hoping to get a picture of me with him in it as I crossed the stage, but I really didn't understand the significance of him being in that chancellor's chair. Lincoln Alexander was Canada's first black member of parliament, and he was Canada's first black cabinet minister, and he was the lieutenant governor of Ontario from 1985 to 1991. But that all happened before I was 12, so it wasn't really on my radar when I was crossing the stage to graduate. So anyway, a couple of weeks ago, I read his memoir. I thought I wanted to see what Link had to say about racism, and it was a personal place to start. I was totally amazed at his description of his experiences of race and his view of himself and how those things changed during his lifetime. He talked about living in Toronto and then later in Harlem. And he also described this transformational trip that he took to Africa in 1960. So it was really eye-opening. So if you'd like to know more about that, his memoir is called Go to School, You're a Little Black Boy. And that title came from advice that his mother repeated to him often throughout his life. So that was really an interesting part of the book, but the quote that I took away for myself for this moment in time is this one. He said, "It is important to keep talking about racism because it has not gone away. It is a part of our history for which we should not be proud." Now, Lincoln Alexander was the kind of guy who you want to make him proud. He inspired that in people. So let's keep talking. I also wanted to think locally about what was locally relevant, and I noticed that some people I know, and maybe this includes you, have been referring to racism, police brutality, protests as what's happening down in the US. And it's important to know that racism and police brutality happen here in Canada as well. Orlando Bowen lives just down the road from me, so to speak, in Brampton, Ontario, and he and I are both members of the Canadian Association for Professional Speakers. So I wanted to hear what Orlando had to say about racism. To give you a little bit of background, in 2004, Orlando was savagely beaten by 2 plainclothes police officers, and it happened less than an hour's drive from where I live. And it ended his CFL career. Canadian Football League, if you're not Canadian, it ended his football career. So I wanted to hear what Orlando had to say, and he's been giving so much of himself lately. He was interviewed in the Toronto Star, and he's been doing Instagram lives with his wife Sky to help educate people, and various other interviews. So I've been watching, I've been listening, and I am just in awe of how much hope. Orlando just radiates hope. I mean, I already knew him to be such an inspiring individual and full of love, but I'm still amazed by the amount of hope that he is spreading these days in particular. It's in contrast somewhat to all the anger that's out there in the world, and certainly the anger is justifiable. But Orlando's attitude of hope, he just compels people to be better. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to hear what he had to say. So I would like to share with you one of the quotes that was in his Toronto Star interview. He said, "I've never been in a position where everybody is thinking about, even if it's just for a minute, the lived experience of Black people, especially the experience of what it's like to be a Black male, to be a suspect all the time." And he went on to say, "I've never been more hopeful. I've never seen anything like this, a moment like this in my life. This is history in the making, and how we choose to respond to this moment will make history." So it's important to keep talking, like Link said, and it's important to keep thinking about the lived experiences of others, like Orlando. Maintain that hope, and then take it further. Now, there's a lot more I could say about what's relevant locally, what's locally meaningful. Orlando and several other speakers of color, Canadian speakers of color, were on a panel recently that discussed race and justice, hope and equality, and it was fantastic, and it's publicly available. I'll leave the link for you. It might be a good starting point if you're Canadian and looking for some Canadian context. That panel also included an Indigenous author and speaker, so the discussion went beyond anti-Black racism and also covered a little bit of anti-Indigenous racism, which is important to know about if you're in Canada. Now, Mike Pinball Clemens was also part of that panel discussion, and he shared this analogy that just hit me. He said, you know, the CN Tower has been standing there my whole life, right? And let's say, for the purposes of this analogy, that the CN Tower represents racism. So he says, I've been driving around, I've been avoiding it my whole life. I've been avoiding racism my whole life. And it's like all of these people woke up today and they're saying, hey, you see that CN Tower? But he says the important thing is that they see it now. Whew. I wish I had seen it sooner, more clearly than I did, and maybe you do too. But the important thing is that we see it now. Another thing that I like about the CN Tower analogy is that there's something in it for engineers. Engineers design structures and services, products, apps and algorithms, all kinds of things that make the world a better place, right? But the thing is that because we design things naturally from our own perspectives, the designs we make include our own biases. Now, I already knew that. That's part of the reason why we have to keep working to increase representation of women in engineering. But one of the things that's new to me in the last couple of weeks is understanding how much racial bias is perpetuated by search engines, for example. I really thought of Google as being neutral and authoritative, but it isn't. I have a lot more to learn on that. I'm only about halfway through Sophia Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression, but that's an example of learning in a direction that's professionally meaningful to me. As a speaker to manufacturing and engineering, technical audiences, it's important that I be informed, and I want to be. So, there's one more thing that I want to tell you, okay? But first of all, I want to give you a 10-second recap. I was overwhelmed by the suggested reading lists, and so I looked for sources that were personally and locally and professionally meaningful to me. If you're trying to make sense of the vast amount of information that's out there, maybe that's helpful. I hope so. Now, one last thing. Remember I said that the titles on the book lists were intimidating to me. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that now, to be honest, but that's okay. We have to reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than we are today, right? Yeah, so those titles, they seemed intimidating to me right up until I heard this quote on Brene Brown's podcast. Her guest was Austin Channing Brown, and here is what she said. She said, "Brene, I tell people all the time that the work of anti-racism is the work of becoming a better human to other humans." I love that. There you go. See, anti-racism isn't a big scary word after all. And yes, I'm going to be diving into some of those scarier titles in the weeks and months to come. But anyway, I'm here to become a better human. I'm pretty sure that you are too. So thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful. Take care of yourself and happy learning.